Guten Morgen. That's all the German I have. I'm sorry. All right. So thank you all for having me. It's always wonderful to be here. I've had the opportunity to come to Berlin quite a few times. We actually had one of our summits here less than a year ago. Some of you may have attended. So it's an amazing time to be able to get here and meet more people and connect. And this morning I want to talk about the OpenStack Foundation and how we're evolving to meet the needs of the open infrastructure opportunities out there in the market. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about OpenStack software. Typically, when I've come to these events, I've talked a lot about OpenStack, the software, what the next version is, when it's coming, what the features are. And today I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to talk a little bit about that, but much more of the time I'm going to talk about how we as a foundation, a nonprofit that supports the OpenStack community, that supports all of you, is really evolving and changing with the market. You know, the opportunities to grow infrastructure and power it with open source are greater than ever. There's more open source out there than ever. So it's an incredible time. In the 9 years since we started OpenStack, so much has changed for the better. And so as a foundation, I want to talk about what we are doing and how we're changing along with the market to help better serve all of you. So OpenStack started off, again, as a software project. So I worked at Rackspace. This was 9 years ago. And there was no foundation. There wasn't a nonprofit yet that was backing OpenStack. It was really started by Rackspace and NASA, the space agency you may have heard of. And when we launched, we ended up with about 25 companies in total that were participating. And really, we were just trying to change the nature of how infrastructure would be built and for the better so that open source would play a huge role in that. That was our goal. And if you really put it quite simply, what we were trying to do was build open source infrastructure as a service software. So hopefully by now everyone knows what OpenStack is, and so I won't bore you with yet another 101 talk on OpenStack. I think we all know what it is, but I do want to talk a little bit about how we came to create a foundation, what that foundation has been working on, and what we're working on now and in the future to support all of you and all of our members. And so really the point of this is just to draw attention to the fact that building open infrastructure software is really what we've been doing the whole time. So when we think about the mission of the foundation and how we're investing in new areas and helping to create new projects, new open source projects that actually go above and beyond OpenStack to support different infrastructure use cases in different markets, we're still fundamentally building open infrastructure software. So when you hear us talk about open infrastructure, it's really not something radically different than what we've been doing for 9 years. It's much bigger than it used to be. There are many more participants. The opportunity is much bigger. There's many more pieces of software involved than just OpenStack. So the landscape's changed very much for the better, but we're still fundamentally building open infrastructure software. And so 2 years after we started OpenStack, we created the foundation. So it's a nonprofit foundation. That's where I work. We have about 25 people spread around the world that are experts in community building, helping connecting members of the community with each other so they can build great software, operate that software. And there are actually 4 of us here today, so I wanted to make sure everyone here knows that the foundation has staff that's come to the event. And so in addition to myself, we have Allison, Aaron, and Sunny, who are all part of the OpenStack Foundation team on the front row. So as you hear more about the foundation and decide to get involved or you have feedback on the direction we're going, you can grab any of us while we're here, and we're happy to talk more. So because we haven't really talked that much about the foundation before, I wanted to come up with an easy way for you all to remember what the OSF is about. So I decided to call it the 4 M's. And then this is, of course, Monty Burns from The Simpsons. For those of you who've been around OpenStack a while may know that we have a Monty as well, Monty Taylor, but sort of he's kind of the 5th M. But but I thought this would be an easy way to think about it. So first I'm going to talk to you about the mission. What is our foundation trying to accomplish? A lot about the members, because it's really about the people that are doing the work and helping to go after that mission. The method, because we have a specific way that we as a foundation and as a community have developed for producing software that works. And the markets. And we're going to end with the markets because the different markets that we're seeing emerge for infrastructure to be automated is really where the opportunity lies. And it's one of the reasons why the foundation is evolving and changing so that we can better support different markets and the needs that they have, which may include OpenStack and other components. In fact, it absolutely does involve many other components. And so the way we're evolving as a foundation is very much driven by those markets. So these are the 4 M's. You'll be tested at the end, so try to remember them. So number 1 is the mission. Put simply, we help people build and operate open infrastructure. So I mentioned that open infrastructure software is really what we've been working on even before we had a foundation. It's still the central mission of the foundation. But what's important here is number 1, it's about people. We're all about connecting people that want to do this work together. The building basically just means writing software, but operating is equally important. All of these pieces of software are meant to be operated. If all we did was just think that the job was done once the Python was written or the Go was written and say that's it, go, good luck, go run it, assemble it yourself, we wouldn't be doing our jobs as a foundation and as a community. So we have to really think about the operations tools, the documentation, connecting operators together, getting operator feedback into the community so that when we build software, whether it's OpenStack or some of the other new projects we're working on, that it's really serving a purpose in the market. And so, open infrastructure, simply put, is just infrastructure built with open source components. A lot of people get hung up on the terms. Obviously, naming is the hardest problem in computer science, as we all know. You probably hear, terms like cloud native a lot. The way that I think about it, everybody has their own definition, but the way I think about it is that cloud native basically was a movement born when the cloud was already there. So that's cloud native, meaning that those tools assume the infrastructure is there, it's automated, someone else is running it. The software that's powering that bare metal provisioning, all that networking is just something you can take for granted if you're cloud native. And that's a wonderful world to be born into. But someone still has to run the infrastructure, and the software to power the infrastructure still needs to be written and evolved. And one of the things I'm going to talk about is how the infrastructure layer continues to need to evolve to support next generation applications. If you think about things like AI and machine learning, to support cloud native tools like Kubernetes. It's nice that you can rely on the infrastructure being handled by someone else if you're sitting at those higher tiers, but the someone else is our community. That's who we serve. And that software, those tools, there's still a lot of work left to be done to evolve each of those pieces to power the needs of cloud native and next gen applications. So that's just a quick summary of the mission. The members are really what this is all about. Another way to think about members would be to say community, but since it doesn't start with an M, I had to go with members. But it's really about the people. So the developers, the ecosystem of companies that are helping people adopt open source for their infrastructure, and those operators that are operating open source infrastructure. So just to give you a quick idea of what I mean by the members. So the OpenStack Foundation, or OSF, has over 100,000 members in 187 countries from over 600 organizations. So when we talk about serving the needs of our members and connecting people to accomplish big things, these are the people that we're trying to connect that are part of the foundation. This is the membership from around the world. And so as a team at the foundation, our job is really to support everyone in the community, to support all of you. And if you're not a member of the foundation, you can join for free at openstack.org/join if you're an individual member. So we have people all over the world that have really been working on open source software for infrastructure for 9 years, 7 years since we started the foundation. There are also, of course, member companies. So these companies help us do what we do, and we thank them for that. So there's platinum members and gold members. The platinum members are actually limited to 8 maximum, so it's full. That's why we don't have 20 platinum members, because by design we limited that from the beginning, just to get the people that were really committed to open infrastructure to step up and say they want to be founding members of this foundation and to get behind it. And of course you'll see a lot of names up there that you're familiar with. SUSE, of course, also T-Systems, and we have other large players from around the world and other parts of Europe, like Ericsson, which is obviously very well known, and City Network, which is a very interesting startup that's based here in Europe, doing OpenStack and other open source infrastructure. And then when you go to the larger list of companies that are supporting the foundation, there are many from all over Europe listed here. And so the point really is that the membership is made up of people, but many of them are from different companies, and those companies provide a very important role in how open source and OpenStack get to market, how the code gets improved, how they turn into products, and how people end up consuming it. So the vast majority of people who run OpenStack partner with at least one company. And so we've really believed from the beginning. I'll talk about our process and our method in the method section. But involving companies was something that we did very intentionally from the beginning. We never thought open source should be sort of walled off from any sort of commercial investment. The investment is actually what helps move it forward. That's who hires developers. It's who builds products, who supports the operators in the field. So a huge ecosystem behind that. Another type of member we have are our board members. And as a matter of fact, we have at least one board member here I know for a fact, Dr. Clemens Hardvig, who I believe is in the back. So if you want to meet one of our board members, I'll put him on the spot. Feel free to grab him and ask more about the future of the foundation as well. But you can see that our board members also come from a very diverse background, from all over the world, many different companies. And when I talk in a minute about the method, this is really key. We're very big on making sure that we have participation from people all over the world. As you can see, with 187 countries represented, that's almost every country in the world that we have in our membership. And we have many, many companies. And so for us, it was important when we took the project from Rackspace and created a foundation that no one company could really dominate the software we worked on, which again was OpenStack to begin with, but we'll talk in a minute about some of the new projects. And then those operators really come from all over the world, many different segments. I mean, these are the people that put the software into production, and they are putting it into production in a huge way. Over 10 million cores of compute are managed by OpenStack today. So that's open source infrastructure for everything from telecom, you probably hear about quite often. 4G and 5G networks are almost all being built on open source, including many of them on OpenStack, like AT&T's 4G and 5G networks are powered by OpenStack, and also Airship, which is one of our new projects, so I'll tell you about that in a minute. T-Systems, Verizon, I mean, there are many, many companies that you may be familiar with from around the world. China Mobile, I believe, has 900 million subscribers, so that's pretty big. But it's not just telco. We have dozens of public clouds. A lot of people think OpenStack is just for private cloud, but there are actually many, many public clouds, including City Network. I mentioned OVH is also a European-based company out of France that's has a massive cloud, many, many data centers, all powered by OpenStack. But beyond telecom and public cloud, we also see financial services. There's a massive adoption of open source, and mainly OpenStack, in the financial services, e-commerce. Many of these companies, if you go to their website and purchase something, that's delivered by OpenStack. So there are ways in which our everyday lives are powered by OpenStack that we don't know. necessarily, but it's pretty cool to look back and see after 9 years, how incredible the adoption has been. State Grid is the largest power company in China, so they actually have 2 million employees, not just customers, but they actually have 2 million employees. So that's incredible scale. And so if you're in China and you get electricity, you're probably getting it through an OpenStack powered network. So when we think about infrastructure, a lot of times it's actually physical infrastructure that people are relying on. China Railway, which is the largest train system in the world, a rail system, runs on OpenStack, American Airlines, et cetera. And then, of course, when you think about the auto industry and manufacturing, we have Volkswagen and BMW, who are both speaking here this week. So you can hear about that. I hear the BMW talk might be in Bavarian. That's the rumor going around. So if you want to brush up on your Bavarian, this is the time. Well, maybe not right now, like after. Okay, so point is, the membership is very much operators as well. Operators are super, super important. And the work they do is really important because we all, if we want our banks to be able to securely handle our money, we want our phone calls to go through, academic and research. One example I'll mention is CERN. Many of you are probably familiar with CERN. It's the home of the Large Hadron Collider. And so they're doing fundamental physics research, trying to find the missing 95% of matter that scientists can't seem to place. And so important work is going on all over the world, and OpenStack is a part of that. So those operators are a huge part of the membership. I mentioned CERN. They have 300,000 cores of compute managed by OpenStack. Yahoo, which actually was purchased by Verizon, then renamed to Oath, and now is called Verizon Media, so it's hard to keep the slide updated. So they change their name like once a month. But I used to work at Yahoo, so they'll always be Yahoo to me before I went to Rackspace. So Yahoo has 4 million cores managed by OpenStack. And one of the interesting things about OpenStack that a lot of people don't know is it is a bare metal management system. There's a service called Ironic. It's one of the fastest growing and most innovative areas where we're seeing OpenStack itself evolve to support new workloads. So when you think about wanting to have that bare metal performance, if you want to run containers and Kubernetes on bare metal, if you want to run with GPUs enabled, other specialized processors, all that stuff that's driving the needs of next generation infrastructure, Ironic is a component of OpenStack that's helping make that happen. So people sometimes think OpenStack is just about virtual machines, and obviously that's one of the main use cases, but it really starts from the bare metal and goes up, and that's one of the areas that Yahoo's investing in, or I guess Verizon Media, as they're now known. So I mentioned a few other China users. OpenStack, it turns out, is big in China, and China is big on large-scale infrastructure. So when you think about scale, China UnionPay is another interesting example. So they have 500 million users, and they process 50 million transactions a day. And they've been running on OpenStack for over 5 years. They're part of the Financial Services Working Group, which is a group of people that come together. And I'll talk a minute about how we connect people in our methods as a foundation, what OSF does. But really, we connect people fundamentally like different users in different verticals, whether they have a technology need in common or they have a specific, the needs of the financial services industry. But this is a pretty big bet on OpenStack, and they've been very, very happy with that. Last but not least, the developers are obviously important in open source. And our developers that are part of OSF Foundation, our members, they have really produced an incredible amount of software over the 9 years. They actually produced 65,000 commits in 2018, which makes OpenStack one of the top 3 most actively developed open source projects in the world. I would ask if you could name the other 2, but they're on the slide, so that might not be fair. But the Linux kernel, probably heard of, Chromium, which is the basis of both the Chrome web browser as well as the Chrome OS, is at an equal level. So no other open source in the world has that level of development velocity. And this continues. That number's from 2018, but we're well into 2019, and we're on the similar pace. So this was in the Stein release. We're about to have the Train release in October. So that's the next release of OpenStack in a few weeks. But we continue to see the same levels of activity. So, one of the ways to think about this foundation and bringing together these developers and the 100,000 people around the world is that job one is creating that software. And so they're doing it at massive scale. So going back to the how or the method, this is really important when we think about the future of OSF, because what we have felt is that there's an opportunity, a unique opportunity for our foundation to take this method and apply it in new ways. And a lot of people have come to us and actually said, okay, we want to produce software that's like a top 3 most actively developed pieces of software, or at least we want to, if not that metric, maybe we want our open source software to power next generation networks or AI and machine learning, or we want our software to be a very diverse community with lots of companies contributing, lots of developers from all over the world. So seeing kind of the way in which OpenStack was developed under the OSF, we've had a lot of people ask us to help kind of build and grow and establish new open source projects along the same lines. So understanding the method is important because it is different. The way that we have built as a community, we, the community, not just the foundation, but everybody who's part of the foundation, all the members, and everyone in the community who've established this method, it's different. It's not like other open source. There's some similarities, but there's definitely some differences. So first of all, it's about connecting and respecting people. So we really believe deeply that every single individual, every contributor makes a difference. Every contributor counts. Does not matter what country you're from, what company you work for, even if you don't work for a company, doesn't matter. You're welcome in our community from any background. And so it's radical openness that we believe in, and really respecting and being as inclusive as we possibly can, and not letting sort of the financial interests or the national interests or the corporate interests determine the future of the software. And that's not necessarily the way all open source works. There's lots of ways to do open source. A lot of it is coming out of one single company. And that's fine. I'm not here to say like that's wrong or bad. It's great. Any open source is good open source. But we do it a little bit differently within OSF. And the most important really philosophy for how we develop software is what we call the 4 opens. So I'll spend a couple minutes on this. So the 4 opens are open source. This one these days is kind of a gimme. It's sort of what everybody does. The source code is available. That's good. That's great. That's kind of the easiest one. Open design is actually probably the hardest one. A lot of companies and individuals struggle with this. But open design means that before any code is written, we have discussions in the open, completely transparently. Anyone can be a part of those discussions. Doesn't matter if you've ever, if you're a sponsor of the foundation or not. It doesn't matter. Every individual can be part of that. Every design discussion is in the open. I'll talk in a minute about our events that we manage. But the getting together in person, events like this, but also the summits that we throw are an important part of where the design discussions happen. So it happens in the open before any code's written, and anyone can participate. Open development means every single day, every code that's committed, every patch that's submitted before it's committed happens in the open repositories. Every patch that's submitted gets tested. It's not really covered on the slide, but we have an important part of the model which involves very rigorous testing at massive scale. So if you can imagine when you have 65,000 commits coming in every year, 150 a day, that's a huge scale, thousands of developers all over the world. So we've built a robust testing infrastructure so that open development can be done reliably. And then open community is really best summarized as anyone can be elected to a position of leadership. Does not matter what your background is, you're welcome. And if you get involved and you do the hard work, you can become an elected member of a technical committee or oversight committee or other forms of leadership that happen in the community. You can be elected to the board of directors. So there are many different ways. I mentioned the board earlier, where you can be involved, and everybody's welcome. So this sort of radical openness is a big part of the method. As a foundation, the OSF, as I said, is about connecting and respecting people. There are a lot of ways we do connect people. One of them is events. We host open source projects, obviously most well known for hosting the OpenStack project, but we're now hosting 4 other projects that I'll talk about in a minute. And that's really kind of the point here, is that this method that's been proven to work at scale, we're starting to evolve the OpenStack Foundation to host more than OpenStack. And while that might seem a little hard to follow at first, if you think back to something like the Apache Foundation, there are so many amazing projects at the Apache Foundation beyond the Apache web server, so Hadoop and on you could name. But it's not completely different from that path as well. So the Apache Foundation created the Apache Way, and projects that really wanted to develop in the Apache Way were welcome to do that in the Apache Software Foundation. So we have what you might call the OpenStack Way, and it's again something we think the infrastructure market needs, and some of these new communities need, are interested in pursuing, that goes beyond OpenStack. So one of the things we do when we connect people is we do it at scale. So more than 20,000 people a year attend 30-plus events, including this event, as well as our global summits. Many incredible volunteers in the community help put on events like this. So I want to just pause and say thank you to all the volunteers who've helped put on this event. So let's give them a round of applause real quick. All right. So those volunteers are not paid by the OpenStack Foundation. They are people that really care about open source infrastructure and want to put it on and want to bring people together. So we are really just here to support them. We also have Super User Magazine, which is an online publication where we publish stories about open infrastructure, open source, things like that, user stories, different technical guides. We also have millions of people that come to our website or websites every year, openstack.org, but also the new projects I'm going to talk about in a minute, Kata Containers, Zool CI, Starling X, and Airship. You can see their websites are all up here. In addition to the social presence on Twitter and WeChat and all the major social sites around the world. So we try to figure out how to connect people through all of these different means, in person, online, and I mentioned work groups as well, special interest groups. There are lots of ways which people want to organize around a specific problem they want to solve, and we just connect people and give them the tools to do the work. So hosting summits is a big part of what we do. We held a summit here less than a year ago in Berlin that was amazing. Hope some of you were able to attend. One of the things we did change this year is we changed the name of the summit from OpenStack Summit to Open Infrastructure Summit. So this was kind of the first sign that we were evolving a little bit as a foundation, just recognizing that at that event, people, even before we changed the name, people were already talking about many open source projects. Like, how do you make Kubernetes work with OpenStack and Docker and TensorFlow and on, Ansible. So there's so many different, and obviously Linux has always been part of the conversation when it comes to OpenStack. So thinking about infrastructure and having the summit name reflect what people were discussing, that's why we changed the name this year. So they're global events. People from 50 to 60 countries historically come to our summits. You have things like keynotes, breakout sessions, all the things you expect from a big event. The next one is in Shanghai. So this is our first time to go to mainland China. So please join us in Shanghai if you're interested in attending. OpenStack.org/Shanghai. You can learn more about the information, but it's It's November 4th through the 6th in Shanghai. It's a beautiful city if you haven't been. I highly recommend it. So another aspect that's, I think, unique or certainly very important to us at OSF in the method by which we help build these products and services and software is we really believe strongly in fighting for the users. I don't know how many of you are old enough to have seen the original Tron, but this is maybe from the remake. I think the original graphics were not quite that good, but one of my favorite lines from that movie is when he says, "I fight for the users," and we heard that and thought, this is a good inspiration for OpenStack. We're always trying to fight for the users, meaning those operators that are running millions of cores of OpenStack or millions of cores of infrastructure and they want to use open source. We really think it's important that they have a seat at the table, that they're listened to. Every OSF project that we host, including the newer projects that I'll talk about in a second, have built into the governance body representation from users. We do a user survey every year. We publish white papers, case studies. We encourage users to talk at the different events so they can give feedback, including this event. And then, of course, there are other face-to-face sessions that happen at different events between developers and operators. So trying to bring people together and make sure that the users are well represented is a very important part of the OSF way or method. And we see more users than ever sharing their feedback. So a lot of these users have spoken or will be speaking at upcoming events, talking about what they like, what they don't like, how they want to see open source and OpenStack evolve to better meet their needs. Companies like Wells Fargo, Tencent, I mentioned China Railway earlier, Sprint, Target, Mercedes-Benz, you might have heard of them. So they're companies from all over the world here, but certainly many companies based in Europe are part of this event, part of this process as well. So one of the reasons why we believe in this method is not just because it's the right way to do it and because it's the fair way to do it and in the most inclusive way to do it. It's because it works, it produces results. So if this method was just about feeling good because everyone's included, then it probably wouldn't be producing the results that it is. It's really about how effective can you produce software that works at scale using this method. And the good news is it works quite well. We've had 19 on-time releases for OpenStack, and we're about to have our 20th release in October, which is Train. So when it comes to producing software on time that's been tested rigorously, this is something that we've proven this model can work. And I mentioned earlier that OpenStack is one of the top 3 most active open source projects in the world. So again, the method does work. And this 65,000 commits is proof that we have the tools, the knowledge, the methodology, the way to connect people and include people that can produce an incredible amount of software in a short period of time. And again, it produces software that people use in production at scale. So when you think about ways you can develop your open source software, if you have a piece of software you want to develop, you have an idea, you have choices, right? There are many different ways you can develop it. There's different foundations you can work with. You can do it without a foundation. There's a lot of great software out there that's not part of a foundation at all. And that's all wonderful. We don't think that every community really is one that is going to want to develop the way that we do things, but there are some that do. And for people that want to pursue this, who believe in this method and these kinds of results, we're happy to talk more about it. And it's not just those users across those verticals. Every day we're learning about new users and producing case studies about them. So we're constantly meeting new users who are adopting OpenStack. And so we think that these are all signs that this method works. And last but not least, it's produced a very large market. So IDC estimates the market for OpenStack commercial products and services to be over $6 billion USD per year. So we're not just producing software that has a lot of lines of code. We're not just producing software with thousands of developers or software that powers millions of cores of compute. It's also producing economic opportunity for companies. So those companies that are members and supporters of our foundation, they're, I'm sure, altruistic and fine companies, but they also want to make money. And so I think that there's nothing wrong with that, and that's part of what keeps the investment going in open infrastructure, is ultimately companies that invest see a return on that investment. And so as, again, companies or communities want to form projects and think about how they want to do it, knowing more about the OSF way, I think, is helpful, and knowing that we're now open to working with more communities beyond OpenStack is one of the messages I wanted to leave you with here today. So the fourth item really are markets. Let me see how I'm doing on time. I think I'm okay. So ultimately, you don't build a product or a service or write a line of code, hopefully, unless you have the intention for someone to use it, which basically means there's a market out there for it. There's demand for it. You're solving a real-world problem. You're not just creating a technology and then trying to convince the world that it matters. You're actually doing something that solves a problem. And so when we think about the markets for infrastructure, it's important to really look at the first 5 years of OSF. So after 2 years at Rackspace, we started a foundation. Then we spent the next 5 years really focusing almost exclusively on OpenStack, right? The OpenStack project needed the dedicated time and resources of our foundation to help build the software that could stand on its own, could be mature. We could improve the upgrade process, improve the reliability. It could serve the needs of public, private, and hybrid clouds. It could power 10 million compute cores around the world. And so that's what's happened during that time period, is the community has become very well established. We've gotten incredible adoption and traction and created this open community and this collaboration model that you see today. So kind of proving that the model works, documenting it, made a lot of sense at this time. And then starting about 2 years ago, we started to look at how we could apply this model to some new markets. So as we think about open infrastructure markets today, there's a lot more open source than there used to be. There's a lot more infrastructure to automate than there used to be. So edge computing, which can also include things like 5G networks, huge opportunity there. But there's some unique requirements that come into play. And different pieces of technology need to be built and integrated and tested to serve the edge computing market. And that's one of the things that we're working on. Container infrastructure is obviously very important. And we have a specific project that we're hosting now at OSF that is for securing container infrastructure in a very fast but secure way. CI/CD, continuous integration, continuous deployment. There's a tool that was built by the OpenStack community that's now being used by many other companies, and I'll talk about that in a minute. AI and machine learning is putting a lot of new demands on the infrastructure. And then, of course, the traditional sweet spot you think of for OpenStack, which is public, private, and hybrid cloud. So across all these infrastructure markets, we felt that OSF, we could be doing more than what we did the first 5 years. We thought there's ways we can apply this method and invite more people in to build the software that's needed beyond OpenStack that complements OpenStack. And so, again, these new demands from things like AI, machine learning, 5G, pushing out to the edge, they're changing both OpenStack as well as all the world of open source outside of OpenStack, including Kubernetes, other container tools. They're all having to evolve to live in these harsh edge environments. And so we're evolving as well to do that. And then within OpenStack specifically, you have the Ironic project I mentioned earlier. And so the Ironic project is really important to people that want to have programmatic infrastructure without virtualization. Or they may layer virtualization on top of it, but it starts by making the whole physical infrastructure programmatically accessible. So these are some of the reasons why we're evolving. And so, the recognition really that we've come to over the last couple of years is that OpenStack isn't going to be all things to all people. We're not going to solve every single technical problem in one set of projects called OpenStack. There's many other open source projects out there, and we need to work with them, work with those communities, test, constantly be testing. And in some cases, there's a need to build new technology. And I'll talk a minute about our integration strategy and how we think about when's the right time to build new technology. But really, in terms of how we've proceeded, I guess about 2 years ago is when we started to incubate our first new projects, focus on these markets. So the very first pilot project we had was Kata Containers. And I'll talk in a minute about what Kata Containers is, but that's that secure container software that helps you run your containers with the security of virtual machines, but the speed of containers. There's more to it than that, but Kata Containers was the first open source project that we hosted at OSF that wasn't part of OpenStack. And so this realization that trying to cram everything into OpenStack was the wrong way to go. The light bulb went off. We heard the community, we heard everyone's feedback and said, keep OpenStack focused on the infrastructure as a service and these other forms of software that you need to build, whether they're built inside OSF or at another foundation or they're built without a foundation, just integrate with them, test with them, work with them, collaborate across these communities. And that's what we've been doing. So when we talk about collaborating across communities, as I mentioned, our community regularly interacts with other adjacent communities. So, and in many cases, there are people who are members of both communities. So there are a number of people who are members of both the OpenStack community and the Kubernetes community. So it's not a question of picking sides. It's really a question of solving hard problems. And these tools solve different problems. And when you put them together, you get a more powerful combination. We see that more than half of the people that respond to our user survey tell us they're running Kubernetes on OpenStack. So people want these things to work well together. We are actually very actively engaged in the OpenStack SIG that's part of the Kubernetes SIG framework that is specifically designed to create tests and requirements so that when OpenStack and Kubernetes are put together, which again is really the most common combination across all of these different tools, that it works. And so right now, today, when Kubernetes is developing, that community is developing a new version, a new version of Kubernetes will not ship unless it passes tests against Amazon Web Services, Google Compute Engine, Azure, and now OpenStack. So if it breaks on OpenStack, they won't ship it. And conversely, within the OpenStack community, we have gated tests that test new versions of OpenStack against the latest Kubernetes release. And if a patch comes in that would actually break compatibility between OpenStack and Kubernetes, we don't ship it. So these are very concrete examples of how we do that. So at the end of the day, the way that I like to summarize it is that the good news is there's more open source than ever. The bad news is there's more open source than ever. And so for all of you who are faced with putting these pieces together and operating at scale, it's much harder than it should be. So we're evolving to meet the needs of these use cases, and we are doing more and more of the testing. And so quickly to go through the steps here, the first thing we do is look at use cases. And I think that this is different than the way technology's historically been developed. Most people, I think, have especially the sort of Silicon Valley mindset of let's build the technology first, then go figure out where the market is, which is not the right way to do it. Because A, there might not be a market, and B, you may have built something someone else already built. That's extremely wasteful. So the first step is what's the use case? The second step is what are the other communities out there? Have they already solved this problem? Can we work with them? And we don't even think about building new software until we've gone through steps 1 and 2. And then if we need to build technology, if there's gaps, we'll build it. And then fourth, test. Continuously test, all that gated testing to make sure that one software that gets changed with the new version doesn't break the old one and vice versa. That's where we've left, I think, the market and too much hard work left to assemble. And that's what we're trying to do. So I think I'm almost out of time, so I'm going to try to go through this real quickly. So just as an example use case, machine learning is probably one of the most common out there. And the way to think about this, it's always tricky when you try to create a diagram with layers, but essentially, if you want to do AI machine learning today, you may want to run that on an application management layer like Kubernetes, and you want to run that on programmatic infrastructure. And that's where the different OpenStack components come in. So a lot of people get confused about what's happening in these communities and don't understand kind of how they fit together. But this way that is being assembled today is very, very common. This is one of the most common ways that people are creating open infrastructure today, is with OpenStack plus Kubernetes plus something like a TensorFlow. But there's still gaps. It's still harder than it should be to run these things together. So we're testing it and we're creating new software to solve that. So when we do decide that we need to build new technology, that means new OpenStack Foundation projects in some cases. And so this is really why and what we've been doing to evolve the OSF. So today we have 5 projects, of course, OpenStack, but we also have Airship, Kata Containers, Starling X, and Zool. And each of these new projects deserves their own hour-long deep dive, and I definitely suggest everybody get to know them if they sound interesting, if it sounds like it solves a problem that you might have. But just to go through them quickly, I'm not going to bore you with the governance, but our projects go through a pilot phase, and then once they've established that they know how to operate the OSF way, and they have a big, diverse, inclusive community, after about 18 months typically, they are confirmed by our board, and they become long-term top-level projects. That's the summary. You know what OpenStack is, so let's talk about Airship. So Airship was really originally created by AT&T primarily, along with SK Telecom, and Airship is a declarative system that really starts from the bare metal up, and it solved a need that AT&T had, and it turns out lots of companies have this need, which is to use Helm charts. So they've taken sort of the best of OpenStack and Kubernetes to create this new Airship project. So it uses components within OpenStack, like Keystone for authentication. It uses components from the Kubernetes community, like Helm charts, to create a very repeatable method for declaring what you want your infrastructure to look like, and then you can do it over and over and over again. The reason why they need that with zero-touch provisioning and upgrades and lifecycle management is because they have hundreds of sites. They actually want to go to thousands of sites. So if you think about running 1,000 clouds, you do not want to do anything manually. And you do not want to have this sense of, oh, my containerized workloads are over here, my virtualized workloads are over here, and we can't tie them together with a common authentication. So they started with kind of their use case, which is pushing out to the edge for 5G. But a lot of companies are now on board with Airship, including SUSE, Mirantis, Ericsson, Dell. So these companies are starting to productize it because it turns out everybody wants a repeatable method for deploying OpenStack with Kubernetes. Even if you only have one site. Most people don't have AT&T's scale, but they do want to be able to install, update, upgrade a comprehensive suite of open infrastructure using OpenStack and Kubernetes in a repeatable way. That's what Airship does. Starling X is also an integration project that includes components from both OpenStack and Kubernetes. So you might notice that's a very common combination. And as at the foundation, it's one of the things we're helping to drive are these projects that bring us together. This is for the edge market, including industrial IoT. They have production users already. They just released version 2.0. Which is being adopted by China UnionPay. I mentioned them earlier, 500 million users and 50 million transactions a day. So they want to push open source and OpenStack and Kubernetes out to the edge, all the way out to those payment terminals. So if China UnionPay, being this industry standard for payment, especially in China, has these payment systems, point of sale systems for processing payments, they want to run open source all the way out to the edge, and so they're looking at Starling X to do that. Zool has actually been around for about 6 years, believe it or not. It just wasn't very well known because it was built by the OpenStack community for the OpenStack community. So with those thousands of developers contributing code, 65,000 commits a year, this is the tool that we built to handle that kind of scale. So the community originally used Jenkins. That's a very common open source tool a lot of people use, but We found that it didn't meet all the needs of OpenStack as a community, so we built Zool as a team. The members of our community built this, and it's now being used by BMW. It's being used by GoDaddy, Leboncoin, who is one of the largest e-commerce companies in France, and recently we learned that Volvo is also using Zool. So it really helps with the software development process, with testing, integration. And their tagline is stop merging broken code. And so they designed a tool that will not let the patch land until it passes every test. And that's kind of a radical way to introduce quality very, very much upstream. So every single day, every single patch. Like I said, the Kubernetes test, for example, if a patch would break Kubernetes integration, then we won't run it. Last but not least is Kata containers. I mentioned that it's the speed of containers with the security of virtual machines. So if you look at how people run containers in production today, there's a lot of mythology out there that, oh, containers are here, you don't need VMs. Well, there's a reason why almost no one runs containers without a VM. It's because of security. But VMs are very heavy, and sometimes you don't need all that. So with Kata, they've taken what was a virtual machine and stripped out all these pieces that a modern application doesn't need. So they give you that isolation of virtualization. It is virtualization, but it's much, much slimmer. So it launches in milliseconds instead of minutes, and that gives you that type of instantaneous speed you want from containers, but with the isolation. It's also grown in the last 2 years, starting from a few companies that seeded it, like Intel and Hyper and Huawei, to today, big players like Microsoft, Google, AWS are donating testing resources to this. SUSE, Vexost, big companies like NVIDIA, Microsoft, Huawei, and others are involved in SUSE, of course. So I was going to test you on the 4 M's, but I'm going to give you the cheat code here at the end. But again, it's about the mission, the members that we work with, 100,000 around the world. It's about the method and putting it to use for new markets and new ways for infrastructure so that open source can be a solution. And it's about going after those markets. So we are the home of open infrastructure at OSF. We really believe in having a diverse community. If you would like to join our mission and help us build and operate open infrastructure, you can go to openstack.org/join. So if you have a project you think would be a fit for the OpenStack way that you want to build with OSF, you can get in contact with us. If you just want to contribute to existing projects, wonderful. Please come join us. If you're a company that wants to provide support for the foundation so we can do what we do, it's all there on openstack.org/join. And if you just want to hit me up, you can hit me on Twitter at Sparky Collier, and we're doing it all for the love of the open. So thank you very much.